It was his 18th birthday when Lucas was told he didn't belong in his own home. The celebration had been nothing more than a microwave dinner in a stiff silence, the kind that wraps around you like cold metal. Hours earlier, he'd uploaded a song, just a rough demo recorded on his father's old USB mic called Let Me Be. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. He wanted to surprise his mom with it, maybe even make her proud for once. But when she heard the lyrics, the soft confession of loving another boy, her face twisted into something Lucas had never seen before. Not confusion, not disappointment, disgust. "You want the world to hear this?" she said. Her voice clipped and sharp. "You want them to know you're like that?" Before he could answer, the speaker was yanked from the shelf and thrown to the floor. The sound cut out mid-verse, leaving only the ringing in his ears and the pounding of his heart. Minutes later, he stood on the front porch with a torn duffel bag, his guitar slung over one shoulder, and the same pair of busted headphones his father had left him when he died. The door slammed shut behind him with finality. Lucas didn't cry that night. Not even when the bus stop bench he curled up on was too cold to sleep. Not even when a stranger offered him a cigarette and called him sweetheart, in a voice that made his skin crawl. He was too numb to break. His mother's last words echoed louder than traffic. "You're not the son I raised." He had always known coming out wouldn't be easy. She was the kind of woman who believed things should be kept private, meaning erased. Lucas thought music might be his bridge to her, the one language they could both understand, but all it did was expose the fault lines she'd been hiding beneath her image of family. For her love came with conditions, and Lucas had just failed all of them. He spent the next few days drifting between public restrooms and 24-hour cafes, doing his best to stay invisible. His money ran out fast. He bussed on sidewalks singing to people who walked by without looking. But he kept playing, because every time he strummed a chord, he remembered who he was, before she taught him to be ashamed of it. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't a mistake. He was a boy with a voice, and that voice still had songs to sing. The headphones became his armor. One ear worked, the other was frayed beyond repair. But they carried every beat he had ever written. Every verse he had whispered in secret, they reminded him of his dad. The only person who had ever said, "You've got something in you, kid. Don't let the world shut it up." His father never got to see him perform. He died when Lucas was 13, leaving behind an old guitar, a hard drive full of love songs, and a silent house that never played music again. Until Lucas did. What happens when the only safe space you've ever had turns its back on you? When even your own mother sees your truth as something to exile? For Lucas, it meant one thing: the world might not have asked for his voice, but he was going to give it to them anyway. Because some stories don't need permission to be told. If this first chapter moved, you stay with us for the rest of Lucas's journey. Like, share, and subscribe to Heart Stories for stories that fight to be heard. The streets had a rhythm of their own, one that didn't care about melody or lyrics, or what someone used to be before they had nowhere else to go. Lucas learned that quickly. Days blurred into nights, and hunger became a dull ache he no longer noticed. His fingers blistered from playing guitar for spare change, his voice hoarse from trying to sing louder than the world's indifference. There were nights when he didn't sleep at all, too afraid someone would take his bag, his guitar, or worse, his body. He never said it aloud, but part of him started to believe maybe his mother had been right. Maybe the world didn't want boys like him to exist. The worst part wasn't the cold or the hunger. It was invisibility. People passed him like he was part of the pavement. The few who looked his way offered only pity or suspicion, sometimes both. And yet every time he thought about giving up, Lucas would pull out his broken headphones, slip one side over his ear, and press play on a single file. Let Me Be rough demo. It was all he had left of the version of himself that still believed in something. He stayed mostly in the Midtown area. There were more people, more noise, and more shadows to hide in, but the sidewalks weren't safe, especially not for someone like him. Late one night, drenched from unexpected rain and desperate for shelter, he accepted an offer from a well-dressed man who said he ran a youth shelter a few blocks away. "We take care of boys like you," he said, offering an umbrella and a warm smile. Lucas wanted to believe him. He wanted someone to care. Anyone. The building was in a quiet industrial corner away from the noise of the city. It didn't feel right, but Lucas convinced himself that safety had to start somewhere. Inside, he was led down a hallway that smelled of bleach and something metallic. A woman gave him clean clothes and told him to shower. Then she took his guitar for safekeeping. His heart sank when he asked where he could sleep. A heavy door clicked shut behind him. He wasn't in a shelter. He was in a cage. What followed were hours of fear. Wrapped in silence, Lucas wasn't beaten. He wasn't touched, not that night. But the message was clear. He was no longer seen as a person, only a product. In the adjacent room, he overheard someone say, "Fresh one, cute, obedient. Give him a week, he'll be ready." Panic surged through him. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He remembered what his father once said when the power went out during a storm. If you can't be heard, make them feel you. Lucas reached into his jacket and found the headphones, still in his pocket. One side broken, the other intact. He slipped it on, closed his eyes, and began singing. Not softly, not nervously, but with rage. He sang the only song he could remember all the way through. "Unwanted Son." His voice echoed through the thin walls, raw and trembling. But impossible to ignore. It was a gamble. Maybe they'd hit him. Maybe they'd drug him. But someone opened the door instead. "Shut him up," someone snapped. That was the moment. Lucas grabbed a broken metal piece from the chair, smashed the window, and jumped 2 floors down onto a fire escape. His legs screamed in pain as he hit the ground, but he ran. He didn't stop. Not even when blood soaked through his jeans. Not even when his guitar strap sliced his shoulder. He ran until his lungs collapsed and his body folded in an alley behind a rundown laundromat. He woke up in a hospital bed with a nurse staring at him like he wasn't supposed to be alive. He'd fractured his leg, cracked 2 ribs, and needed 13 stitches along his thigh, but he survived. Not because someone saved him, but because he did. He didn't become a statistic. Not that night, and yet when the doctor asked if he had someone to call, Lucas gave no name. His mother, the woman who said she wished he'd been born different. There was no one. He was a ghost with a voice, and now that voice was bleeding. But fate wasn't finished with Lucas. One day after being discharged, limping through a community center looking for food, he saw a flyer pinned under broken magnets on a wall. It read, "Do you have a voice that needs to be heard? Auditions open. Youth Rising Talent Series. LGBTQ+ friendly. No ID required." Lucas stared at it. Part of him wanted to laugh. He was in no shape to sing, let alone perform. But another part, the part still playing demos in his mind, whispered, "What if this time they listen?" Lucas walked into the community center out of desperation. His stitches still stung. The crutches hurt more than his bones. The heat of summer made the inside of his hoodie unbearable, but he wore it anyway, to cover the bruises, to stay invisible. The place was loud, clattering trays, volunteers shouting names, teens arguing in every corner. It wasn't quiet or clean, but it was warm. It didn't smell like bleach or fear. And for the first time in weeks, no one asked what he was. A volunteer handed him a sandwich without a glance. He ate it slowly, almost suspiciously, as if expecting someone to snatch it back. Then he found the flyer again, the one he'd seen on the wall before he passed out from hunger the day before. It had been reprinted cleaner this time. A bold headline still read, "Youth Rising Talent Series." In smaller letters below, no ID, no problem, no labels, no judgment. Lucas folded the paper into his jacket, not yet ready to believe in it. He hadn't sung since the night he escaped. That version of him felt like someone else now. Someone softer. Someone less broken. But the idea clung to him like a stubborn lyric he couldn't shake. That's when he met Sasha. She wasn't loud or flashy like the other staff. She noticed him sitting alone in the hallway and sat down beside him without asking questions. Her nails were chipped, her voice low, her presence calm. She looked like someone who had heard a lot of screaming and had learned how to be the silence afterward. "You thinking about signing up?" she asked, nodding toward the paper sticking out of his coat pocket. Lucas froze. He hadn't shown it to anyone, hadn't even opened it again. "I used to sing," she added. "Before my voice changed, before I knew what kind of woman I was." That made him look up. "I was locked up once too," she said quietly. "Different room, same story. They told me I had no worth, that no one would believe me if I ever spoke up." Lucas wanted to ask how she escaped, but he already knew the answer. She hadn't just escaped the room, she'd escaped the shame. "You don't have to sing for them," she said. "You sing for you, and maybe for the next kid who thinks they're alone in this mess." He didn't reply. But that night, when the center emptied out and he was curled on a cot in the far corner, Lucas pulled out a notebook. It was one Sasha gave him, still smelling faintly of peppermint gum and hand sanitizer. He flipped to the first page and wrote the words, "They tried to sell my voice. Now I'll use it for something real." The next morning, he filled out the audition form. The judges wouldn't know who he was. He had no formal training, no polished video submission, but the application didn't ask for his backstory. Just one question. "What does your voice mean to you?" Lucas wrote, "It's the only thing I've ever had that was fully mine and the only thing they couldn't break." He hit submit. That night, Sasha found him sitting by the vending machine and handed him a second pair of headphones. Real ones, still secondhand but whole. She didn't say much, just tapped her chest and said, "Your voice, your rules." Lucas nodded. For the first time since he'd left home, he felt the faintest sense of momentum. Not escape, not victory, just direction. His legs still ached and the nightmares hadn't gone away. But when he listened to his old demo, his voice raw, off-key, imperfect, he didn't cringe. He heard proof. He was still here, and soon the world would hear him too. The audition room was smaller than Lucas imagined. There were no velvet curtains or rows of blinking lights, just a folding chair, a microphone, and 3 people behind a long table covered in clipboards and coffee cups. He almost turned around when he saw them, but Sasha's words echoed in his ears. "Your voice, your rules." So he stepped forward, limping slightly, his guitar swinging low against his hip. He sang "Forgotten Door," the song he'd written in the hallway of that fake shelter. His voice cracked once in the middle, but he didn't stop. He didn't close his eyes, didn't pretend to be somewhere else. He stayed exactly where he was, trembling, scarred, and steady. When he finished, the judges didn't say anything for a moment. Then one of them, a woman in her 40s with eyes like she'd lived 100 lives, simply said, "You've got more than a voice, you've got something to say. We'd be lucky to help you say it." Lucas advanced. The following weeks felt like some surreal imitation of life. Vocal coaches, rehearsal spaces, wardrobe fittings, interviews, all things he used to dream about from the floor of his childhood bedroom, praying his mother wouldn't knock and ask why he sounded so feminine when he sang falsetto. Now those dreams were unfolding, but with strings attached to memory, to trauma, that still tightened every time someone clapped too suddenly or praised him too easily. He stayed in temporary housing for contestants, but kept mostly to himself. When asked for his story in interviews, he gave them pieces. Yes, he had lived on the street. Yes, he'd been rejected by his family. Yes, music had saved him. But he left out the parts that still made his stomach turn. The locked door, the one working headphone, the way shame still tried to sneak into his suitcase no matter how far he ran. On the night of the first live performance, he wore black. Not to blend in, but because it reminded him of the alleys he survived. The sound booths he wanted to own. Sasha had sewn a silver thread into his left sleeve, barely visible, but meant to represent resilience. "You made it out," she told him backstage. "Now tell them how." He stepped into the light with a heart that felt too loud for his ribs. The audience went quiet. Cameras rolled, and then the music began. His song, "This Voice Is Mine," opened with a single note held longer than the room expected. Then came the verse, gentle, deliberate, but rising. Every lyric was a thread pulled from his own unraveling. "They tried to sell my voice, said it wasn't mine to keep, but I stitched it to my skin, so it sings when I bleed." When he reached the chorus, his body stopped shaking, not because he wasn't afraid, but because he no longer cared if fear showed. He sang not for sympathy, not for approval, but for all the versions of himself that had been silenced, erased, or ignored. Then in the second row he saw her. His mother. She wore beige like always, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her mouth tense, expression unreadable. She hadn't told him she was coming. No one had. She looked the same and completely different. Time had narrowed her face, hollowed her cheeks, but her eyes hadn't changed. They still held that distant panic, like love was something you had to monitor or control. Lucas didn't miss a beat. He didn't falter. He kept singing. But in the final line, he looked directly at her and let the words break free. "You tried to close the door, but my voice was louder." Applause erupted before the last chord finished ringing. The lights went out. Lucas walked off stage, exhaling something he hadn't realized he'd been holding onto for years. Backstage people congratulated him. Interviewers swarmed, but Lucas didn't stay. He slipped out the back exit into the loading dock, sat on a crate, and took a long breath. He had no idea why she came or what she wanted. But it didn't matter, not tonight, because the stage wasn't just a platform. It had become his confession. Booth, his reclamation, he'd sung in alleyways and shelters, in hospital beds, and under bridges. But this was different. This was the first time he felt heard. 3 days after the performance, Lucas was summoned to a law office downtown. The building was tall, faceless, the kind of place people walked into wearing quiet shoes and left with louder problems. He'd been told nothing, only that it involved a private matter related to his father. He thought of the night his dad passed, how they'd never had a real goodbye, only a voicemail. He still carried on a cracked old phone. Whatever happens, keep making noise, son. Now in a room of polished wood and distant eyes, a man in a navy suit greeted him with a brief nod in a folder thick with time. "I'm Douglas Crane," the man said. "I represented your father, Marcus Vale, before he passed. He left a trust in your name. Music grants studio credit, a lakeside property in Oregon." The number he named made Lucas blink, 6 figures, plus an ongoing publishing fund. Lucas didn't speak. He didn't move. He didn't dare believe it. "There's just one complication," the lawyer continued. "Your mother filed an addendum requesting that you forfeit your rights. Publicly, she's concerned about how your platform might reflect on the family estate." The word platform tasted like poison. "She's offering to cooperate with your media requests, exclusive interviews, even local broadcasting support, if you agree not to attach your father's name to your work or mention the inheritance in any capacity." He slid a single-page contract across the table. Lucas stared at it, a tidy little paper with tidy little sentences designed to erase an entire man's love. There were no threats, no bribes, just a clean-cut exchange silence in return for convenience. "Your mother wanted you to know," the lawyer added gently, "that she's proud you're doing something with your life. She just wishes it had come differently." Lucas picked up the pen. His hands trembled, not with fear, but clarity. All he could hear was his own voice from 3 nights ago echoing in his memory. "You tried to close the door, but my voice was louder." He set the pen down. "I'm not signing it." Douglas raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure you could build your entire future with this?" "I already am," Lucas said, "and I'm building it on truth." He walked out without looking back. That night he returned to the community center and sat beside Sasha on the curb. She didn't ask questions. She handed him a soda, tapped her toe to the beat of a song, playing on someone's speaker nearby. The next morning, Lucas posted a video. No crew, no edits, just him, one working headphone and his father's guitar. He played a new song, one he hadn't shared with anyone yet, called My Last Silence. It opened with a single line, "You gave me your name." She tried to take it, but I wrote it into every note I'll ever sing. The video went viral within hours, but Lucas didn't care about the views. He'd already won. He later used the court documents, yes, the ones he refused to sign, to start a nonprofit under his father's name, the Vale Fund, providing music equipment and emergency housing for homeless LGBTQ+ youth. When the press asked why he gave up the inheritance, he said simply, "Because the truth is worth more." In a final public statement, his mother released a single sentence, "We don't wish to be associated." Lucas replied in his next performance, not with words, but with a harmony that trembled, soared, and refused to be silenced. If someone tried to buy your silence, would you take the deal? Lucas didn't. And maybe that's what made his voice unstoppable. Let us know what you would have done, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Heart Stories for more true stories of those who dared to sing louder than the silence.